Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. I think we're the last thing standing between you and lunch, maybe, so we'll try to be efficient in our discussion. But we've got a lot to talk about today. It's a very timely topic, U.S. competitiveness, challenges and opportunities. It comes out, we're having this topic at the same time that the Aspen Strategy Group has just issued this important report talking about how to improve American competitiveness, talking about education, R&D, STEM education, rethinking how we teach our young people and getting ourselves into a position where we can tackle the future challenges that we have here. Now, it's a really fascinating subject. My colleague, Alex Palmer, in the New York Times Magazine wrote this Sunday about the semiconductor war between the United States and China. And he quoted a semiconductor analyst as saying about some export controls that the Biden administration has just put on semiconductors. He said, if you had told me that these rules, about these rules 5 years ago, I would have told you that's an act of war. We would have been at war. So that's the first question, I guess, Eli, to you, I suppose, is are we at war, in effect, over semiconductors and U.S. competitive right now with China or other competitors across the world?
Thanks, Peter. And it's an honor to be here on the panel with Zoe. Thanks to Aspen for inviting me. So I think what we've seen couple of last years is really basically two trends happening at the same time. When you look at what has happened since 2015-16, it was a realization that the China we have hoped for is not the China we got. And I think when you look at the speeches from late Secretary Carter in DOD and everything in the late Obama administration, you see that shift in this realization that we are in geopolitical competition with China. So that is one trend that was happening since 15 and 16, obviously accelerated under the President Trump when national security strategy called China as a great, China as a competitor, and now we're seeing the policies that the President Biden and the administration has really been taking on the economic space for the last couple of years. So that is one trend. The other trend, and I think the piece that you have today in Financial Times, is technology is the center of this competition. When you look at what China has been doing since 15, 16, and 17, they've been doubling down on critical technologies, investing in critical areas, coming up with a list of technologies they want to dominate, and really going after it from the organizational and resources perspective. So I think what we have been doing, I think we've been on one side trying to bring back some of these critical manufacturing capabilities, and I think CHIPS Act is one of those, I think, moves that our country has made in the last 3 years to really bring back some critical components that we need to be built in the United States. And I think on the other side, I think these export controls that the Department of Commerce released on October 7th really are part of the protect side, some of the things that we need to protect to really stay ahead in this technology space. So I think you got to look at it from a more broader perspective of how both things really how both trends have really evolved in the last couple of years to understand why are we in the position we are today.
So Zoe, talk a little bit about that. We are investing billions now from the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act, from the Infrastructure Bill, from the Inflation Reduction Act. What will that money be used for? Will it be enough, and is it doing the right kinds of things we need to do to get the country to where it ought to be?
Well, I think some of the panels earlier today helped make clear, if it wasn't clear to you before, that technology is really what's driving our economic growth, and it's going to be critical to our economic growth. So these investments reflect a new way of thinking about the government role with the private sector. I think there is some overemphasis just on the government spending. The government investments are really intended to trigger private sector investments at the same time, and they won't succeed and they wouldn't have passed if there wasn't very substantial private sector support and indications of commitment to invest. So I think what you're seeing is this administration, the Biden administration, has really taken a new approach that the passive, fully market-oriented approach to the growth of our economy and our competitiveness globally really needs to be supported by government investments. And these have been bipartisan laws with a lot of leadership from the president to get them passed. So we now have, if you take the Chips and Science Act, which you've been hearing about today, and the great panel Penny and was on earlier today, and I won't spend too much time on that, but we now have an awareness that we have dropped the ball. The pandemic really revealed that the central role of chips in absolutely everything has been left the U.S. shores, and we need to bring that back. And part of the reason you need to bring it back is if you look at where innovation takes place, it takes place where manufacturing happens. There's not enough emphasis on the fact that innovation doesn't happen if you're not connected into the supply chain. It doesn't happen if you're not part of where manufacturing is taking place. It can't just happen in a university lab. It's part of the process of production. And I think TSMC would tell you that their greatest innovations come from the people working on the factory floor. So we need to have that happening in the US, not just in the semiconductor industry, but these other investments that you reference will cause that to happen with public and private investment in green technology and biotech and AI, a whole range of technologies that are really going to be critical to our future.
Part of what's critical, of course, is the workforce. That's something you guys think about a lot, I think, at the Chamber. I've covered 100 events where presidents said, we're going to really make the workforce training better, and we're going to update it for the modern world. What do we really need to do to make that a reality now? What are like 2 or 3 specific things we ought to do to get this workforce in line for the competition we have ahead of us?
Well, we are doing it, and these laws include funding for workforce, and what we need is the STEM education we've talked about for a long time with younger people, including young girls, seeing themselves in these jobs, understanding they need to learn about technology. But we also need a system we have never had, and no country in the world has, which is a system of rapidly and affordably updating the skills of our workforce once they're in the labor market. And we're working very hard against that now. I'm happy to expand on that. But this is really going to be a critical component of competition. These investments won't succeed for us or really any other country if we can't develop the workforce we need. And something like 60% of those jobs don't require a 4-year college degree. They're technicians' jobs in a semiconductor facility. They're highly skilled plumbers or electricians. There's a whole range of really important work that's central to our competition in every technology, and that requires constantly renewed skills.
We're going to open up for questions in a few minutes, but Ely, what about AI? You've heard a lot about AI today, a lot of AI at this conference because it's so much on everybody's mind. What role does that play right now in terms of our competition abroad? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah. So I think, as mentioned, I think technology is really the dominant feature of the competition, and then Zoe mentioned that of how we get ourselves organized, investments we make. But when you look particularly which technology is really that technology, I think AI is that technology. I think now we have all seen what has happened since the last November with the release of these powerful large language models. I think we're at the beginning of seeing the implications, both for good and bad, of these models that have for our society. Obviously, like any other technological transformational moments we have seen in our history, this is probably that moment that will have an impact on education, on workforce, and ultimately on our society, and ultimately on our national security. So the way we train and equip our military and the way you use these capabilities, I think will matter for the future of war. So I really believe this is a critical moment that we need to move forward. I think there are 4 things that we got to do like in the next 18 months. Number 1 is we need to be better organized for this era, because I think traditionally we've been organized anytime we've had challenges like that. After World War II, we created a National Security Council because the security was the predominant feature in our competition against the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, we created the National Economic Council because the economy was the post-Cold War domain of competition. After 9/11, we created the Homeland Security in the White House. I think right now we need to be better organized. I think something like Technology Competitiveness Council, and I know at every department and agencies there are islands of hope on getting after this organization, but really a top-down driven organizational piece is required for this age. The second piece are really the people, and as Zoe mentioned, I think there are 3 aspects to the people piece. Number 1 is increasing the number of STEM students that we have. we're still lagging behind many other advanced nations, to include China. The second piece is the immigration reform that I think it was touched upon a lot today, but H-1B really is critical. You saw yesterday 10,000 people from the United States applied for the Canadian opportunity. As an immigrant myself, I think America still remains the world magnet for the talented individuals. So I think we need to unlock that magic. The third piece is really the hardware piece that I think Zoe and you touched upon, how we implement the CHIPS Act, and I think Pat Gelsinger talked about this, really is critical as we head towards the latter part of this decade. And then the last piece is how do we maintain the innovation ecosystem? And I think this is what Zoe was talking about, like, the partnership between universities, government, and academia is critical. This is how this country really remained #1 innovator, and so we have to nurture that ecosystem. So I think these 4 moves are really critical in the next 18 months before we head into like a most dangerous period for our country, probably in the latter part of this decade, in terms of China.
Well, Zoe, you've spent a lot of years thinking and studying government. I mean, that's a good question. Are we antiquated at this point? How should we restructure government at this point to meet the challenge?
I think there's so much going on now that's, excuse me, moving so fast. And there are a lot of people in government who have been unleashed to really work at these hard problems, and a lot of people from the private sector who've come into government. You heard Doug, I came in from the private sector. I mean, there are a lot of people who are coming in because of their commitment to this moment and the importance of this moment. So I'm thinking less about structure and more about how do we really implement the CHIPS Act very fast? How do we address the challenges of AI? How do we ramp up our green energy investments? And that certainly at the Commerce Department, we are completely focused on execution against these investments that Congress has put in our hands.
Right. Right. And how about our allies? I mean, working with our allies in Europe and Asia, they're both competitors and friends at the same time. I mean, how do we balance that, do you think?
It's a really important moment with our allies for the reasons Eli referred to, but just as importantly, we need the strength of our collaborative efforts in order to compete. And so we're working, the president at the beginning of the administration, one of the first things he did was create the Trade and Technology Council with the European Union, and that's a place where we're working on supply chains together. It's a place where we're working on investments that are mutually supportive rather than competing with each other over investments in things like semiconductors and clean energy. And it's also a place where we've now created an effort to build our workforce together. So we have a component of the Trade and Technology Council where we are actively, with labor, business, and educators, actively developing the programs and the investments to train the workforce so that we are collaborating in that as well.
Eli, how do you feel about that in terms of working or not with these European and Asian countries that are usually our allies?
And just to build on what Zoe was saying, I think we're seeing a new momentum really in this space. When you look at, the structures that the administration has built on or created in Asia Pacific with AUKUS, Quad, and the TTC that Zoe mentioned, technology really is the key topic probably in all these conversations. And I think AI is that technology that is being discussed in all these forums. I think how we unlock that collaborative approach really will matter for the years to come. I think whether or not we have a joint vision for how we're going to build and use these technologies, how we're going to have joint R&D between our countries to include people exchanges, etc. And then lastly, I think what is really critical is how we as democracies is going to go around the world and offer, let's say, to the global south, these kind of technologies. What we have seen is that in our absence, China has really filled this vacuum in the last couple of years. When you look at the world 5G map, it's primarily red because Huawei, heavily subsidized by the CCP, has gone around and offered to these countries their model of technology. So I think this is a momentum which, together with our allies and partners, we can complement each other's comparative advantages and really go around the world and offer our ability to use these technologies, in a way that is, favorable to our norms and laws and ethical values that we share in this country.
I was fascinated. I'm sure everybody in this room probably already knew it, but I was fascinated by the statistic in the New York Times Magazine piece on the semiconductors that Taiwan produces 2/3 of the semiconductors in the world, 90% of the advanced ones, which really changes the complexion when you think about the China-Taiwan geopolitical situation, because it's not just a matter of strategic, issues that we've been thinking about for all these years, military and politics. It's actually also, an island that is indispensable to the world economy right now because of its unique status in that sense. We should open up for some questions here. I think that there's a microphone maybe going to wander around. Does anybody have any smart question right there?
Thanks very much. My name's Baird and I'm the ambassador of New Zealand. Thanks very much to the panel. To broaden the conversation away a little bit beyond technology, I mean, one pathway to competitiveness is to ensure that your exporters are on a level playing field when it comes to the markets to which they're exporting. And one classic way of achieving that is by pursuing market opening free trade agreements. And I just wonder whether the panel would comment on how they see that featuring into the US policy prescription. Thanks.
Zoe, do you want to take that?
I think it's always important to put that on the table. That is not the purview of the department in which I serve, so I would be reluctant to speak for the U.S. trade rep. But if you have things that you think would be complementary to what we're saying that you want to expand on, I would welcome that.
Sorry for getting a second go. Well, I mean, I guess, if you look at the way the Indo-Pacific operates as an economic ecosystem, it is increasingly concluding deals with itself. And the two big kahunas there are the CPTPP, which the UK just joined this weekend, and the RCEP. Now, the United States is not a member of either of those agreements, which means that the preferential arrangements that are agreed as part of them are not something that your exporters get to access. So it's really just a reflection of how that plays out in the policy process, and I accept commerce isn't necessarily directly in the lead there, but I was trying to expand on why I see it as an issue. And there is, of course, a very direct read across to the theme of national security because of the nature of the countries who are members of those agreements or who want to become members of them.
Okay, right here, and then we'll come to you.
Good morning. Patrick Wilson from MediaTek. We're one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers in the world, happen to be based in Taiwan. And I'm actually curious about the global jump ball for getting companies like ours to decide, Intel was here today, to decide where in the world to do innovation. Obviously, the CHIPS Act gets to some of that on the manufacturing side, but I'm curious about the design side and what we should be doing to attract investment from international companies to choose the U.S. as the place to innovate when obviously every other jurisdiction is in the game.
Yeah. You want to go, and then Neely, do you have some?
I would just comment that we're looking at every aspect of the production life cycle, design, the supply chain, and looking at investments in that full range. And there's enormous interest from business that's being expressed in response to the CHIPS Act. So I think that you'll find that it's going to be addressing the full range of challenges and elements of the whole production process.
Yeah, just to add to what Zoe was saying, I still think when you look at the last 3 and 4 years, I think there's a momentum here that's in our favor. Number one is the COVID vaccine. Look at how fast we were able to come up with that public-private partnership. When you look at these large language models that have emerged in the last 16 months, I think most of the companies are US-based. I think between universities, people, and the innovation ecosystem, I think that would be more attractive. The investments coming from Congress and the administration really to jumpstart a lot of these manufacturing capabilities. I think the momentum is building here. I think we need to move fast in terms of implementation that Zoe was talking about. But I think momentum is really here. I think we need to continue in this path. But I'm an optimist, so
Let me also comment that we annually hold an event at the Commerce Department called Select USA, which is an event to bring companies from all over the world to U.S. shores. And this year, there were an extraordinary number of companies from all over the world who came to Select USA looking at how they could expand their operations in the U.S. or bring their operations to the U.S. in order to be part of these technology sectors that are going to be growing through the investments. Again, chips and science, which has R&D investments and is attracting R&D from all over the world, as well as manufacturing, and clean energy and biotech and the full range of investments. So there really is a vibrancy that has been developed by these investments.
A great one right here. And then we'll come to Brittany.
Hi, Michael Greenwald, Amazon. As we continue to expand this multipolar world, how do you see the U.S. negotiating differently from an economic competitiveness perspective, especially as the dollar continues to drop? I mean, what points of leverage do you think we have with allies and adversaries moving forward?
I think we still have tremendous leadership and, in fact, renewed leadership globally. And we've created a number of enterprises where that's playing out. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, for example, is one. AUKUS was mentioned. And certainly the Trade and Technology Council with the Europeans. I think that U.S. leadership is still enormously important on the world stage, and that this is very much in partnership with the private sector. I mean, IPEF, or what we've done in Africa, these are moves that we're making with the private sector. So when Secretary Raimondo travels, she often travels with large numbers of U.S. executives who are going to these regions with her in order to show their commitment to investments and collaboration. So I think that the special magic of the way we work with the private sector in the U.S. is recognized around the world. Certainly I see this in the Trade and Technology Council, where the Europeans are trying to understand how we, for example, brought skills-based hiring into businesses in the U.S., where educators have been working with businesses to try to be much more focused on what actual skills they need, as opposed to just graduating people from traditional institutions with traditional degrees. And that kind of collaboration with the private sector just hasn't happened in Europe. And so they're very anxious to learn from us about that. So I think really the special sauce that the U.S. brings that is recognized around the world and has helped us maintain our place in those dialogues is the collaboration with the private sector.
Okay. How about right here? We have coming your way.
Thank you so much. I'm Brittany Moriali. I'm one of the Rising Leaders. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the Global South. I'm glad we touched on it briefly. But I was wondering what aspects of our strategy are targeting people-to-people engagement and technology transfer in the Global South, and how much we're thinking about building a technology-fluent young population from Africa, for example, that's also fluent in American values and understands our nation.
That's a great question. I think with all the development of these technologies, I think that we have a momentum here that together with our partners, because in some cases our allies and partners will have a much more insight into how we reach out to these countries. I just met with the Korean delegation. They have a tremendous relationship with Indonesia. India is a tremendous partner for us when you try to reach certain countries in Africa. So I think a partnership around technologies and enabling these countries really to become smart nation that can utilize technologies for their educational purposes, healthcare, and all these. I think that is the angle that I think we approach these countries on top of the formal channels we have right now with our allies and partners. But I think that would be, my story about this is after the end of the Cold War, we partnered with a lot of countries around the world to go and offer building institutions for countries that came out of the communism. You know, now if technology is the secret sauce, I think we can go and offer, you know, kind of advantages that we have in that space in helping these countries really build their capabilities to become a smart nation.
All right, I think our time, unfortunately, is up. But what a great panel. Thank you guys very much for taking the time. It was terrific to have this discussion. Thank you all for participating. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate it.